Never the spirit was born. The spirit will cease to be, never. Never was time, it was not. And in the beginning are dreams. Birthless and deathless and changeless abideth the spirit forever. Death does not touch it at all.
Feel and understand that Hopewell House stands on some really immense historical shoulders. That the thing that we're doing at the house has been done before and has been done in different ways. And we can learn from those by looking at those examples and being inspired by those historical standout stories. Whether you look at Saint Vincent, Saint Vincent de Paul, who cared for slaves, was a slave and cared for slaves and was sainted for it, or whether you look at the amazing hospice in Bourne, France in 1490, actually 1450. Each of those stories stands out in history and provides examples of what a community can do when it brings its resources together and chooses to change the environment in which people die. In the 1490s in France, life was really brutal. There were marauding bands and people. Life was hard. Death is always hard, and that hospice just stands out in history as an example of beauty and grace and care for all the people in the community, which is how it was designed. That.
But it takes a village, as I mentioned, to keep the house going, and everybody plays a part. Short of it is they had this beautiful kind of manor home that was built by Roscoe Hemingway in 1927. It was just graced the hillside that it was on. In the early 1980s, the house became a hospice, and it was known as Hospice House. And it was a functioning hospice at that time. The funds were being raised to build a patient wing, a 12-bed inpatient hospice wing, one of only 6 in the country at that time. And so in 1986, there's Joan, and it was the groundbreaking ceremony to start the actual construction to add this patient wing onto the exterior of the house. And it was quite an event. In the 90s, and that's when Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon came to be and share a part and then own Hopewell House, Hospice House, which then changed its name through Tom Buell came up with Hopewell House. It ended up that in the late 90s, Ecumenical Ministries then partnered with Legacy, and they took over the clinical supervision. They took over the nursing staff, while Ecumenical Ministries still maintained the run of the house into the early 2000s, where in 2004, I became the supervisor at that time for the hospice. Well, probably 2005, Legacy purchased the entire program and the grounds. In 2007, after a couple years of planning, we embarked on replacing all of the windows, all new stucco. And then we needed to put a new roof on it. 2009 to start the patient wing remodel. And so that's when we went from a census of 14 to 12. And it was just a much more, it was such a much more peaceful environment and an experience for patients and their families. And we really tried to make it a community space. It was just such a great team. And we really tried to focus on the patient experience and the family to make a very tough situation joyful. Not everything was joyful. You had family fightings, but there was always the staff there, the dedicated nurses, CNAs, wonderful housekeeper, cook, that made everything just work. really thank the volunteers. We would not make it without our volunteers that are here every day, helping, sitting with patients, just picking up something that is on the floor, wiping something down, rearranging a bouquet of flowers. The volunteers just brought so much, and then helping the staff as well. Mainly, it just takes a cast of thousands to keep this house running, and so you don't.
When I started here at Hopewell House back in 2006, I was pretty overwhelmed by the compassion that was so present in the care, and the care that was delivered by everybody. The nurses, the CNAs, the doctors, the chaplain, the social workers. When I came here, they're the ones who taught me. It wasn't just the nurses. I would watch the nurses for the way they handled patients who were homeless and vomiting all out in the front living room, and how tender they were with their care. I would watch the nurses, when patients were outside by the fountain, delivering the morphine as they were actively dying, and just watch the way they moved so effortlessly, and they just brought so much love to the care that they gave. The CNAs also so gentle with the patients. I still hold on to so much of the wisdom that they provided me, whether they knew it or not, just how they turned a patient, how they would reach down and hug a patient to help them get out of bed. They were so sweet always with the patients.
There was a patient who would come sit out here every morning, drink her coffee, smoke a cigarette. And she was here about 2 months. And she said this was the best part of her life, being here at Hopewell. She had been homeless almost her entire life, she said.
That patient, in their last days, respect. If they wanted a cigarette, then get them a cigarette. If they want a hamburger, get them a hamburger. Whatever they want, meet them where they are and try to help.
One of the honors of working at Hopewell House was being able to validate and follow through with different cultural and religious requirements of our patients and families that came here. And I'd like to share 4 stories of 4 different religious groups or cultures. We would have people here that followed the Muslim religion, and it was important for them to pray at various times during the day. And they would bring their prayer rugs into the large living room and set them there, and then times would be set aside for them to use that room so that they could carry on their religious wishes. We had people here that were Orthodox Jews. One of their requirements was at time of death that all of the mirrors are covered. So there would be a large mirror over the sink, and anything else that we could do to provide for them, we would take sheets and do that for them. Another person was a Native American Indian. And he was in his 30s. He had no family, no friends. And his wish was that at the time of death, a red blanket be put on his body, because for him that meant that he would be accepted into the afterlife. So one of the nurses took a bath blanket home. She dyed it in her washing machine and brought it back, and we kept that folded on the window seat in his room. And he told us how much comfort that brought him to know that it was sitting there and that we would honor his wish when he died. The last story is a beautiful story of a woman named Yumiko. She was Japanese American, and she had many, many friends and family come in and out of her room. But they just didn't sit there. They started folding cranes. And as you can see, this is just an example of some of those cranes that they not only folded, but then strung together. And they had hoped to make 1,000 cranes, which they did as she was dying. And then these were hung in her room. And the family was generous and kind enough to offer a strip of these cranes to anyone in the staff that wanted to take one home. So I have one at home that I do love and
I
cherish.
remember sitting on the couch right there playing games with his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do that at home because he was so sick. And it was just terrifying for my sister and for his kids. But once we got up here, we were able to laugh and joke. The family could spend the night and be with him. Somebody was with him all of the time. And we had a lot of time to reflect and just be happy again. We hadn't had a chance to be happy for a long time, so it was wonderful.
And a lot of being a good volunteer from my standpoint is just being able to listen. Folks like to be heard, and they have things to talk about when someone they love is dying. So it's been a great experience for me, and I'm coming back.
Knowing that there's been so much history of ups and downs and ups and downs, and then mainly up, and knowing that people get to come through these doors and be supported, and also that volunteers get to learn from them, it's like one of the bright lights in what feels like a very dark time period in our world right now, to feel hopeful that there's an opportunity for people to feel supported and loved and to die in peaceful presence and pain-free.
My hope would be that the house could welcome all patients, all people of all races, wherever they're at in their end-of-life journey, without having to send them home or back to another place. That was one of the frustrations when we were under the general inpatient model of care, is that once they got well, sometimes, which patients did when they got focused care, then we would have to send them back home or to a foster home or another place for them to live. And the families would get so frustrated with that because they would want their loved one to stay here. And so in the house, and they couldn't understand why they had to leave. And that was a very sad experience for staff and for patients and families. So moving forward, it's hoped that we can just keep people here for their duration until the end of their life, and that they can have an experience that's positive, and that the family can just be with them and be present, and that they will have some nurturing and love until they take their last breath.
When they were ready to close here, I was the people who has more time working here, and then I think this affect me too much. And then I told some volunteers, and I told my daughters too. In the new paradise, I want to be Hopewell House as my house in the new paradise, and then God loved me too much, and I think He will give me that place to have a lot of people right there all around, and then have a beautiful garden. But that one was one of my dreams, and then I feel so happy, and I don't have words to say.
I'm hoping for just expansiveness. That's the best word I can think of to describe possibilities. Alternative therapies. Expanding this place so that Hopewell House is a template for other future Hopewell Houses all around the world. When Hopewell House touches people, it hits them in the heart, and people, it doesn't go away. So I want as many people to be touched by this place as they can, because it really is transformational on so many levels. So I hope for the same that happened here long ago, and yet I hope for all the bright possibilities of what could be. And I know that Friends of Hopewell, who brought this place back together, they are the ones who can help nurture that dream.
And so understanding the mission, it needs to be something that's simple and complex. Living well in the presence of death was a phrase that we used at the beginning. And it means bringing value, living well, bringing beauty and art and comfort and joy and celebration and palliation of symptoms and reconciliation and all the lovely things that humans do, living well in the presence of death, which is really hard. It's a hard thing. It'll consume all of that love and compassion and hopefully balance out in a moment of beautiful death.